Hey everyone, I'm still taking time off this week to spend time with family, to celebrate my wife's birthday with her, but I thought it would still be nice to share with you an interview that I did, just in case you're missing some time with me. So before the Dobbs versus Jackson decision came out in June, I sat down with Cy Kellett on the Catholic Answers Focus podcast to tear apart common pro-choice arguments and pro-choice stereotypes of pro-life people. And the interview is still quite timely because you're hearing all of these arguments now, just as I predicted you would be hearing all of this. I said even before, it's funny, when you go back and listen to the interview, I'm such a Debbie Downer. Like, we're talking about it, and I said, even if the court doesn't overturn Roe v. Wade, this is still a big deal. And you could tell, like, I just had a hard time getting my hopes up. But now, yippee! I'm happy that we've made this advance to protect the lives of unborn children. We have not won the war by any means, but we have secured a major victory. And that means we have to continue to push forward. And we have to do so in an assertive way and a gracious way. So I hope this interview helps you to be able to do that, to give you some tips for engaging in these conversations. They're going to be coming up more and more and more. But yeah, hope that's helpful for you guys. And don't forget to subscribe to the Catholic Answers Focus podcast if you want to hear more interviews like this. And of course, continue to subscribe to the Council of Trent. Leave a review for us on Apple Podcast, Google Play. That's always helpful as well. So without further ado, here is my interview with Cy Kellett about debunking pro-choice arguments and stereotypes about pro-life people.
One thing that is clear, because the media has made this clear to me, is that the pro-life movement has overwhelmingly been a movement of violent people who attack pro-abortion people and abortion doctors and all of that. It really has been an extraordinarily violent movement.
Well, that's what you'll hear from the media, that overall the pro-life movement is violent. But when you compare the pro-life movement to other social movements throughout history, the pro-life movement is one of the most peaceful social movements of all time. This is a movement in the United States composed of tens of millions of people. Think about all the people who go to March for Life, who pray in front of abortion facilities. So while there are other movements around, if you think there are other movements around the country, such as animal rights movements, which are, I would say, they're not as large as the pro-life movement. I've never seen a animal rights march that could compare to the March for Life. And yet animal rights, environmentalists, frequently engage in acts of violence. They'll put steel spikes into trees when loggers try to cut them down. They will blow up laboratories, burn them down. In fact, there's a whole branch of violence dedicated to that called eco-terrorism. Similar other movements throughout history have resorted to things like violence. But the pro-life movement, and it's really interesting, I was reading an article at Slate, which is an online publication, very liberal, so very in favor of the pro-choice worldview.
Right.
But one of the articles there, I remember the author saying, it's actually quite surprising how little violence there is in the pro-life movement, given that pro-lifers believe thousands of human beings are being killed every day.
Yeah.
And he was
that's very fair.
Because there have been, pro-life advocates who have killed abortion providers, who have engaged in violence, but the pro-life movement as a whole, like, you should judge a movement by the major players in it, the major organizations, and they have universally condemned it. And its strategies. And its main strategies. Because you'll see other movements do rely on violence, intimidation, and threats as a main strategy, or they won't denounce violence committed by those that are done in the name of the movement. They'll just turn a blind eye to it. But the pro-life movement has not done that. For 50 years, the pro-life movement has worked legislatively, pastorally, educationally, and is seeing gains from that. And the acts of violence that have occurred have been the work of lone individuals who are unwell and have chosen to do this. And any movement that is large enough will have individuals like that in it.
And it's a vast movement that went on for 50 years. And you probably could point to half a dozen, maybe a dozen
handful, probably,
cases of violence in its name, and all of them condemned, by the leaders of the movement. Okay, but here's the thing, and this also I learned from the American media. this is illegitimate for the Supreme Court to decide something, for these black-robed justices to decide for the whole country that on a major issue like this. That's just illegitimate. And the court itself is illegitimate because pro-life people somehow stacked the court.
You know what? I almost want to agree. Yeah, I do think it was illegitimate when the Supreme Court in 1973 prevented states from protecting the unborn.
Wait a minute. So you're saying if I make the argument today that it's illegitimate for the Supreme Court to insert itself in this issue, I have to go all the way back to the original Roe decision and ask, was it legitimate then?
Well, yes, if you're going to be consistent and fair. Man. It's interesting that you can see another course that is taken on these particular issues. That in 1973, Roe versus Wade really cut off the ability to discuss and shape at the state level abortion policy and laws.
Yes, right.
But there is another moral issue. The one I would compare this to would be, and people will say, like, if you leave this up to the states, it would be anarchy and chaos. You know, the court has to step in and do this. No, it doesn't. To give you an example, I would point to assisted suicide laws. Now, I would like assisted suicide to be illegal in all 50 states.
Sure.
But progressively, different states were loosening their laws, allowing assisted suicide through the use of physicians or through, I don't want to call them medications or poisonous pills that are taken to kill somebody. But I want to say it was 1999, there was a Supreme Court case, Washington versus Glucksberg, where the court ruled unanimously, 9-0, that there is no right to die in the Constitution.
Yeah.
So assisted suicide advocates, what they wanted in Glucksberg was for the court to say, like it did with Roe, that a state may not prohibit assisted suicide. Mm-hmm. And the court chose not to do that. They said, well, no, there's a long tradition of protecting people, protecting the mentally ill. Suicide causes a lot of harm. So there's a long legal tradition of it. So it is constitutional for a state to outlaw assisted suicide, but the court said in Glucksberg, a state does not have to do it. They may ban assisted suicide, but they're not obliged to.
But wait, I haven't noticed the chaos and the madness that states get to decide this for themselves.
No, what we have is some states like California and Oregon and Washington that allow this offense to human life, and other states that protect human life, that that if you're a doctor, you say, well, I'm in the state of Texas. I can't give you a drug to kill yourself. That's illegal. I will lose my license. I'll go to jail.
Right.
And we understand that some states have been able to move public opinion and to protect life, the life of the elderly or the disabled. Other states, unfortunately, have not, and we have work to do in those areas. And so it seems to me quite reasonable to allow abortion. Now, ideally, I would like abortion illegal in all 50 states, but it's a reasonable improvement from my perspective to treat abortion like assisted suicide, where you have states that are able to protect the unborn and others we have to do more work in.
Yeah, and then we'll just do the work then. We're not saying
that's right.
We'll just forget about it. Okay, states, we'll do the pro-life work.
Right.
But okay, so I got one more for you, and then you can tell me some straw men that you hear.
Sure.
But this I also learned from the American media. You see, I've learned a lot of things from the American media.
You have heard a lot of things.
Well, yes, I suppose that's one way of saying it. But clearly, the whole pro-life movement is kind of rooted in a old-fashioned religious and kind of anti-science view that really, like, it's almost it's a struggle between a religious point of view that wants to impose itself and a more secular scientific view that doesn't want to impose itself.
That is actually correct, but the roles are reversed.
Excuse me?
Yes, it is the pro-life movement that has consistently argued from a secular and scientific perspective. The only people who bring up religion in abortion debates are pro-choice people. In debates among, policymakers, among leaders of pro-life organizations, among pro-life apologists like myself. So among people who are involved in promoting, defending, and explaining policy related to abortion. Or in media, the only people amongst that group who bring up religion are pro-choice people. They're the only ones who bring it up precisely to try to say this is a religious issue. Or they'll say something like, some religions believe that you should have abortion through all 9 months, and we can't tell them that their religion is wrong.
Yeah.
But they're more than willing to tell pro-lifers who say, well, marriage is a union of a man and a woman in my religion, so I'm not going to take photographs of this wedding that violates my religious beliefs. Tough cookies with your religious beliefs. You can't impose them on innocent people, is what they would say. And I would say, well, same for the unborn. If you have a dangerous religious belief that it's okay to kill them, you can have your belief, you're just not allowed to act on it. There was a Supreme Court case back in the 19th century dealing with Mormonism. Back when the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Mormons, allowed for polygamy. And then later they received a divine revelation saying polygamy is no longer allowed. Coincidentally, right at the same time that the federal government was cracking down on polygamy and outlawing it. And so this went to the Supreme Court. It was a case called Reynolds versus the United States. And the court said, arguing, well, should people be allowed to be polygamous because that's their religion? And the court said that if freedom of religion meant that people could ignore any law they wanted, then the law could exist in name only.
Sure.
If you can disobey a law solely because of your religious inclinations, law could only exist in name only. It would be anarchy. And so, so when people bring that up, I say that's not a good argument for abortion. The question is, what can we look at with objective things like science to determine what the unborn are? Whatever reasons we have for outlawing the killing of 2-year-olds, that would also apply to the unborn because they're equally human. So you're right that it is religion versus science, but 9 times out of 10, when I hear like the ladies on The View talking with their elegant discourse about these issues, Whoopi Goldberg or someone else will bring up, God wants us to have free will. It's God's choice for us, or the Bible says this. Or you'll have other people saying, I think it was Whoopi Goldberg who told Archbishop Cordileone withholding communion from Nancy Pelosi for voting for the legality of killing children through abortion. That's not your job. Oh, yeah. Even though he's the bishop.
It's quite literally his job.
Exactly.
Yeah, right. Custody of the sacraments.
I find that those who defend abortion tend to bring up religion to muddy the water versus those who are pro-life. While their religious convictions move them to be pro-life, just as the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr.'s religious convictions moved him to be anti-racism.
Right.
The movements that they were proposing, the laws they were proposing, were religiously neutral.
Yeah, right. And so could I go so far as to say the reason that the pro-life movement, and I'm going to be quite graphic here, so excuse my graphicness, but the reason that the pro-life movement concerns itself with pregnancy but does not concern itself with masturbation is science.
Right. Yeah, people will say that, if you're opposed to abortion, why aren't you opposed to sperm that die after an act of masturbation?
Right.
Or an egg that dies through menstruation? And the answer is because those aren't human beings. That would be another straw man that people will say that, pro-lifers think that anything that's alive or anything with human DNA is a person.
Okay.
That's not what pro-lifers believe. What we believe is that every human organism has the same basic right to live. Every human being. Yeah. And we define human being as an individual member of the human species.
Okay. All right. I have more of these straw men for you, but I wonder if you have any that you want to get to, because I don't want to use up all the time on things I've learned from the American media.
Well, I had one that was, another one connected to the status of the unborn child is people will put a straw man this way. They'll say the pro-life position is that a fetus is a potential person, and so it's wrong to kill them. But, potential person doesn't mean actual person. But a potential president of the United States doesn't have the same rights as the actual president of the United States. Now, on the one hand, this argument is a little faulty because president-elect does have more rights than when he was merely a candidate.
Yeah.
He doesn't have the full rights of the president, but he still is treated like the president in many morally relevant senses. But more, I would say, that's not the argument. The argument is not a human fetus is a potential person, therefore it's wrong to kill them. The argument is they are a person. Now, they have the potential to act like a person in the future. They can potentially act like a rational person in the same way an infant can potentially act like a rational person, act in a way beyond non-human animals. But an infant is a person, even though they haven't reached that stage of development yet, and the same would be true for an unborn child.
Okay. You want more from me, or you want to give me any?
Let's take a few from you. That'd be fun.
Okay. All right. The pro-life movement, when you get right down to it, is a movement of control. in essentially wanting to control women's bodies. This may derive from a kind of sexual repression or otherwise inspired misogyny, but it is clearly a movement of control.
What I would say here to those who would make this argument, and actually a pro-choice philosopher, Nathan Nobis, who I debated at Emory University, he has a book called Thinking Critically About Abortion. And he says this is a bad pro-choice argument. He says that even if you had a bad motive to do something, it could still be a morally right thing to do. So, for example, suppose you wanted to end poverty or clean up pollution, and the only reason you want to do that is to look famous and have people heap praise upon you.
Yeah.
That's not a very noble goal, but it's still good. It's still a good act to reduce poverty, to clean up the environment. And so even if you had a bad motivation, like, for example, suppose there were a prosecutor who prosecuted rapists, and it's because she hates men and she just wants men to suffer.
Yeah.
And so she rigorously prosecutes and lawfully convicts men who are truly guilty of rape. So she's not, framing anyone or anything like that, but she's doing it just so that she can make men suffer. Now, I think that that's a bad motive, but prosecuting rapists is a good thing.
Yes.
So even if one had a bad motive, it wouldn't mean that, even if pro-lifers had these terrible motives, that wouldn't mean protecting the unborn is bad, what they're doing. Now, of course, the main complaint I would have is I've never met these mythical pro-lifers. These mythical pro-lifers who are only concerned about controlling women's bodies.
It terrifies me that women are having sex, so I need to have no abortion. Yeah.
What I find are people who are horrified about the killing of the unborn because they treat abortion as being morally worse than fornication, for example, or even contraception. Many pro-lifers recognize those things as being bad, but they see abortion as being worse because it kills an innocent human being. So the claim that men just want to control women's bodies, my point though, so Nobis says, yeah, maybe that's true, maybe it isn't, but you don't want to judge people's motives. Nobis puts it this way. He says, look, pro-lifers sometimes say that pro-choicers only want abortion to be legal so they can have sex without responsibility. So the claim that pro-lifers only want to control women is the mirror image of the straw man of the pro-choice position, which is that abortion should be legal so women can be promiscuous. I think actually many people who defend legal abortion have other arguments that the unborn's not human or doesn't have a right to a mother's body. And even if they had that bad motive, it wouldn't affect the validity of their arguments for abortion. So Nobis says, put the motives aside, judging the motives, because human beings are bad at that. Just judge the arguments.
Okay. Well, let me throw out another one for you.
All right.
I have two more these two are both if ones. If you outlaw abortion, this is what will happen. If you outlaw abortion, then the gains that women have made as participants in the economic life of the society will be lost because women will be handicapped in relation to men as far as career prospects and job prospects.
Yeah, and what I would say here is that this is a very anti-feminist way of looking at the advancement of women in society.
Really?
So the argument seems to be that women, in order to achieve equality with men, the argument is men are able to be so successful because they can't get pregnant. In order for women to be as successful as men, they have to be able to not get pregnant either. So we need abortion and contraception. The argument is basically saying men are able to be successful because they're men. So the only way women will be successful is if we make them men. If we basically turn women into a kind of what's the word? Simulacrum. Simulacrum.
Yeah.
Yeah. A simulacrum, a facsimile of a man, basically.
Yeah.
That, you're someone who can have sex and not get pregnant. Like, what's the definition of a man? What is a woman?
Oh,
there's a definition.
Yeah.
Here's one for you, Matt Walsh. A woman is someone who can have sex and get pregnant. Not every time, not all the time. Some people can't, but in general, they can. And a man is someone who can get sex. Who can have sex and not get pregnant.
Yeah.
And so that seems that they want to change what women are. So I would say that is a poor definition. This also has come up in the leaked Dobbs draft. This was mentioned. This came up in oral arguments for the case. saying that in the 1970s, yeah, there was discrimination against women in the workplace. You had, and since in the 50 years since the early 70s, we have had developments in things like sexual harassment laws, pregnancy discrimination laws.
Oh, yes, right.
And so we are now in a place where women do not face the discrimination in society, where maybe you had to get an abortion because you could be fired for being pregnant. Now you cannot be.
No.
So there has been these changes have been made, these advancements have been made, not in getting women to be treated as if they are men, but understanding that men and women are different and accommodating them accordingly.
But could we also say, in addition to that, because certainly like some of the things that went on in this, even into the 70s and 80s, as far as pregnant women are, people would be shocked to know that they were illegal. But would you be willing to concede this point, though?
Okay.
We still have a long way to go in welcoming pregnant women and mothers into the workforce. That the rules of the game still are stacked against women. We need to do better in that.
Sure,
regard.
we should be able to have things so that women are capable of breastfeeding at work, of being able to not sacrifice their femininity and their motherhood.
Yeah.
Just as, and I think the other problem here is that we live in a workaholic culture that expects fathers to sacrifice their fatherhood for work and for other things like that.
That's a good point, yeah.
And so instead of asking mothers to sacrifice their motherhood, we have to look at things a different way. So we don't ask parents to sacrifice parenthood, and we keep things in their proper perspective.
All right, here's my other if one. If Roe is overturned, it's a domino effect. It's Obergefell will be overturned, and there'll be no more gay marriage. The Connecticut
Griswold versus Connecticut
will be overturned, and there'll be no more contraception. And all down the line, I've even heard that certain civil rights protections, hard-won civil rights protections having to do with race and sex, gone, because without Roe, the framework for all the rest of this just collapses.
Right. And I would say I would look forward to many of those cases you mentioned being overturned. Mm-hmm. But a case being overturned, it does not first, if they were overturned, I would be grateful for that. Especially since even if you set aside a moral issue, many people will agree, even people who are pro-choice or on the left, so to speak, they will agree that a case like Griswold versus Connecticut, which allowed for the sale of contraceptives to married couples, there's not much substance to the case to be able, to justify it. So even they will admit the cases aren't well-founded, but even if a case were overturned, if you overturn, say, Griswold versus Connecticut, that wouldn't mean contraception would become illegal the next day. All it would mean is you could now restrict contraceptives. But unlike abortion, we live in a culture that is basically sold on contraceptives.
Yeah.
While abortion might be 25% very pro, 25% very against, 50% mushy middle, it's more like 98% very for, 2% very against.
Right.
Even among Catholics when it comes to contraception.
Yes.
So it's similar with so-called same-sex marriage. Even if these things were overturned, it wouldn't follow that they would be outlawed the next day. It would just show that if a case was poorly decided, then we should not allow bad law or bad precedents to stand. And people should be able to dialogue with one another and come up with a communal understanding of community norms. However, so that's my principled thought on those things. From a practical standpoint, so I would like them to be overturned. I don't think it would be a bad thing. And I don't think it would lead to the consequences that the critics say would happen, even if I would want those consequences in some cases. Sure. But on a practical standpoint, I don't see that happening. For example, with so-called same-sex marriage, you have conservative justices who, like Gorsuch, I think it was Gorsuch, who actually who voted in favor of treating sexual orientation and gender identity as falling under the Civil Rights Act.
Right.
So you have justices who might vote that Roe is badly decided, but they have different opinions about same-sex issues or about the establishment of the precedent behind contraception. And so on a practical matter, I don't see them moving in that direction.
And they need to have cases brought.
And the case has to be brought. That's right. And so if there's no plaintiff, there's no one seriously suing, if there's no state trying to pass a ban on same-sex marriage.
Right. They're not a legislature. They just can't propose
But people want to treat them like that on both sides. And that's why I think the Supreme Court has become a very hostile environment that people fight over viciously. We used to have Supreme Court nominations that were 96-0.
Yeah.
That were unanimous, or that were 80-90% of the Senate. Now it's strict party line, razor thin, because the court has been treated as another legislative body to create law rather than to interpret it. So I think the more decisions the court can make where it allows the states and other politicians to have the ability to decide things, that will make for a better democracy overall.
Yeah. It all went downhill for the Supreme Court when we gave them their own building. They used to meet in the basement of the Congress, and everything got better then.
Too big for their britches.
Why do they need their own building? Just put them back in the basement.
Yeah, right.
Then we'll get proportionate rulings from them. All right. Last one that I have. You're free to do any more that you want. But this, I think, is one that stings the heart of the pro-life person. So,
okay.
Yeah, you care about the baby until it's born. But really, are you going to vote for things that care for mothers and children after the baby is born? Are you going to take care of that baby? What about health care, for children? Why are, still are not available for some children in this country? Food, housing, all these things. Sure, you care about the baby till it's born, but seriously, the rest of this is it's not pro-life at all. You're phony pro-life.
And what I would say is that those who say they're pro-woman, they do not care about women at all. They have no concern about women unless they support school voucher programs to give moms the ability to send their kids to any school that they want to. Less gun restrictions so that mothers can purchase any firearm they think is necessary to protect their children and to protect their family. Reducing licensing requirements so women can go out and start businesses without burdensome regulation. Cy, it's these people. Here's the basic thing I would say. The people who disagree with my politics hate women and children.
So did you just do the old switcheroo right there? Is that what that was? I wasn't sure what you were doing.
I did.
All right.
That's what I think is so disingenuous about this particular objection. That what is smuggled in is saying, trying to take, you don't, because if someone just put it that way, well, you're not truly pro-life unless you agree with my politics. People will say, well, I am pro-life, but I have different politics than you.
Yeah.
It would be one thing if it would be inconsistent if someone said abortions should be illegal in the first, second, and third trimester, but legal from the 4th to the 30th trimester. So it's like from newborn to like age 10 or something. That would be genuinely hypocritical and inconsistent.
Right.
And you could say you only care about the babies before they're born, not after.
Right.
So that's the problem, that they are confusing. The pro-life movement is about restoring the right to life to unborn children. Other issues, such as reducing human mortality or reducing human suffering, are not, strictly speaking, the job of the pro-life movement. They're the job of human beings with a conscience. And so people in general are called to, but the problem is that people will disagree. What are the best ways? We have gun violence. What are the best programs that will reduce mortality from gun violence or mortality from breast cancer, or the best ways to reduce the negative effects from poverty? What are you going to do about poverty? The idea is, in this objection, you only care about the poor if you support a particular entitlement program of mine.
Yeah.
And that's also assuming every government entitlement program is of equal worth. What if I say this program makes sense, but this one's very wasteful? Am I not allowed to say that? Or what about other ways of dealing with poverty that aren't, strictly speaking, an entitlement program? For example, it's been well understood there is something called the success sequence. Your odds of being poor drop like below 20% or below 10%, very low. If you get a high school diploma, get a job, get a high school diploma, and then don't have children until you're married. I think it's 2 out of the 3. Shoot, I'm not successful. I don't remember the success sequence. But I know the big thing there is to get a high school diploma, probably to become gainfully employed. That's the one I'm iffy on. But it's definitely don't drop out of high school and don't get pregnant outside of marriage, or don't father a child outside of marriage.
Right.
Then if you can do those, at least those 2 things, don't drop out of school, don't have children, whether you're a man or a woman, you're very unlikely to end up in poverty.
Yeah.
And so if you follow that sequence, so encouraging people, and they've done studies, it's not just that non-poor people happen to follow the sequence, that the sequence really does have effects for people when it is followed. So my point is that if someone literally said, I don't care about the poor, I hope they die,
yes,
then the objection would have force. But I've never met this mythical pro-lifer who wants to control women and kill poor people.
Right.
That is a boogeyman created in the mind of someone who disagrees with me.
Yes.
Rather, a pro-life advocate would say, I think abortion should be illegal, and those who face an unintended pregnancy, there's different ways we can address those issues. And we might have agreement and disagreement, but just because I don't share your politics or this other person doesn't share my politics doesn't mean either of us hate women and children. It means we disagree on things where we can reasonably disagree about, like how to reduce poverty. But the question of what legal protections do the unborn deserve, we cannot reasonably disagree. Justice demands they be legally protected from being dismembered before they're born. And so that's where the inconsistency can come up. You could say, look, you don't want poor born children to be mistreated, but you're fine with poor unborn children being killed. Aren't you really the inconsistent one here?
Man, that old switcheroo, that's your tactic. You got the old switcheroo down.
My kids are doing jujitsu and they're showing me all their moves. So now I'm using
use the enemy's strength against it.
That's right.
That's all I've got as far as straw men. You got any more straw men that you?
I think we've got a whole field of them. We have more than enough to scare away the ravens of misinformation.
Well, let me ask you to make a prediction then, and you don't have to if you don't want to, but in your sense of things, having been in this struggle for a long time. Do you think that the overturning of Roe v. Wade, and God willing it will come soon, will tear at the fabric of, in some irreparable way, the fabric of the society? Or do you think it's something that we can integrate and move on from and continue to function as a society?
I do not think that it will result in a societal breakdown.
Okay.
So I don't think it will result in something like a civil war, is at least one. I don't think,
or a division of the republic.
I don't think it will result in that. But if Roe versus Wade were overturned, I think it's going to be a big deal for quite some time. But I think that Americans are in a good habit of moving on to the next thing, for better or for worse.
Yeah. Okay.
And so I think that most people are ambivalent towards abortion. The majority of people are ambivalent towards it. Mm-hmm. And so hearing that it's been more legally restricted, that will upset a very vocal group of people who live on the internet, but they are a very small minority of the country.
Really?
I truly, if you talk to normal people and ask them what they think about abortion, they might say they're pro-choice, but then when you get to brass tacks and ask them hard questions, you can tell they're confused and ambivalent about it.
Yeah.
And so given that, I think that people will be able to move through their moral reasoning and come to equitable democratic solutions in the different states for how to address the issue. Just like we do it in some states, some guns are legal, other guns aren't, assisted suicide. You have different regions. You had even with mask mandates in different states, it's different.
Right.
And that's one of the geniuses of the American experiment, is that we're a country of 300 million people, but we're not just a country of 300 million people. We're equally a nation of 50 states.
Yeah.
And so having that federalism is so important. But ultimately, though, so if it is overturned, you'll have the fight will be more severe in other places. But it will still take a long time, just as it took a long time to eradicate other injustices, slavery, segregation, and even after major legal victories like the Civil Rights Act, major legal victory, the cause of ending racial injustice still continued for quite some time.
Right.
And so I think we'll see something similar with the pro-life movement.
Yeah, but not surrender the we're as much as you say that the states will come to different conclusions, and in its own time and place, that's a good thing. That's an improvement. Still, we don't lose sight of the goal, which is every human life,
right?
Respected,
but it's more
from conception to natural death.
But it's more feasible when you're capable of moving the majority of people to enact even incremental change.
Yes,
that's something that's feasible. When before you had a precedent by 9 appointed people in black robes that prevented anything from happening.
I think it was 7 actually.
Sorry, 7 out of 2.
I know Byron White didn't go along with
and
God bless him.
I think, did Rehnquist dissent?
I don't remember if Rehnquist was on that court. I can't remember.
I want to say, well, was that the Burger Court?
Yeah.
It's all the jumbly I have a rumbly in my tumbly from eating lunch, which is now a jumbly in
your brain.
My brainy.
Well, thanks for taking the time after lunch, even with the afternoon foggy brain, to have this conversation. I really appreciate it. And,
of course.
And God bless you in all of your pro-life work, Trent.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks for watching this video. If you want to help us produce more great content like this, be sure to click subscribe and go to TrentHornPodcast.com to become a premium subscriber. You'll help us create more videos like this and get access to bonus content and sneak peeks of our upcoming projects.